What do you say when you know it's the very last time? Some mothers spend their final breath begging their children for forgiveness. Others whisper words that sound almost haunting. In this video, we step into the chilling world of killer moms, women like Terresa Lewis, Kelly Gissendaner, and Velma Barfield, whose last goodbyes to their kids were as shocking as the crimes that brought them to death row. These were not ordinary farewells. They carried pain, guilt, and sometimes a strange kind of love twisted in tragedy. So what really happens in those final moments between a mother condemned to die and the children she leaves behind? Stay with us, because the answers will both break your heart and make your blood run cold. First is the case of Terresa Lewis. It's September 23, 2010, 9:13 p.m. inside Greensville Correctional Center in Virginia. A woman, a mother, strapped to a gurney. A glass window separates her from her family, and then her last words. Now pause right there.
Ms. Lewis did make a last statement. She said, "I just want Kathy to know I love her, and I'm very sorry."
These aren't just words. They're the final breath of a woman who lived as a wife, a mother of 4, and a stepmother, and who also died branded as a killer mom. But how in the world does a woman with children of her own, a woman living in small-town Virginia, end up here, sentenced to die by lethal injection? Let's rewind. October 2002. The case shocked everyone. Prosecutors said Terresa Lewis masterminded the murder of her husband, Julian Clifton Lewis Jr., and her 25-year-old stepson, Charles C.J. Lewis. The motive? A $250,000 life insurance policy tied to C.J.'s military deployment. 2 young men, Matthew Schallenberger and Rodney Fuller, were hired to do the job. And who opened the trailer door that night to let them in? Terresa herself. Shots rang out, lives ended, and a family was ripped apart. And here's the chilling twist. When officers arrived, Julian, Terresa's husband, was still alive. He whispered words that sealed her fate. "My wife knows who done this to me." Imagine hearing that from a dying man, pointing to the woman he shared his life with. But there's more. Within days of the murders, Terresa wasn't grieving like you'd expect. Investigators found she was already moving fast to cash in. She tried to pull $50,000 from a forged check, already thinking about assets before funerals were even over. To the prosecution, this wasn't a grieving wife. This was cold, calculated, and the judge called her exactly that, the head of the serpent. The gunman got life in prison, but Terresa the mom got the death penalty. Now here's where the debate kicks in. Was Terresa really the mastermind? Or was she in some way manipulated herself? Defense experts said her IQ was 72. They said she had a dependent personality disorder, that she was weak, easily led, and addicted to painkillers. And one of the gunmen, Schallenberger, even later described manipulating her. So the question lingered. Was she pulling the strings? Or was someone else pulling hers? And yet, none of that saved her. Appeals came and went, protests from human rights groups, petitions, pleas for mercy. Nothing worked. The execution date stayed. But let's talk about the family. Terresa had 4 biological children of her own. But the harshest emotional weight came from her stepdaughter, Kathy. She sat behind the glass on execution night, the one person Terresa turned her last words toward. No long speech, no excuses. Just, "I love her and I'm very sorry." A broken family stitched together one last time by words that came too late. If you think that was cold, then you need to hear the case of Kelly Gissendaner.
And then she made a statement apologizing.
"I love you, Sally. And I love you, Susan."
September 30th, 2015. Just after midnight in Jackson, Georgia, the heavy steel door slides open. A hush falls over the chamber, and there she is, Kelly Renee Gissendaner, a mother of 3, a convicted murderer, and the first woman Georgia would execute in 70 years. As the state prepares the lethal injection, Kelly begins to sing. Her voice, shaky but clear, she sang Amazing Grace. But here's the question that chills you. It's not just about her crime. It's about her children. Because even in her very last words, Kelly's thoughts were tied to them. Stay with me, because her final message to her kids was both heartbreaking and unforgettable. To understand this moment, we have to rewind. February 7th, 1997. Kelly was just 28 years old, caught in a toxic marriage with her husband, Doug. She didn't want a divorce, she wanted him gone. Permanently. Why? Investigators would later say it was about comfort, about not losing the house, about insurance money. Instead of leaving him, she turned to her lover, Gregory Owen. That night, Owen ambushed Doug, forced him into the woods, beat him, stabbed him, and when Doug's body was left to die, Kelly was nowhere in sight. But prosecutors made it clear she was the mastermind. She was the one who asked for a way to get rid of him. The torching of Doug's car, the brutal stabbing, the cover-up. All of it, they said, carried her fingerprints in planning, if not in blood. Now pause for a second. Because this wasn't just a murder trial, this was a story that would scar her 3 kids forever. Their father was dead, their mother was facing death row. Imagine that as a child, both parents were taken away. One by violence, the other by the system. The case moved fast. Owen took a plea. Life with the chance of parole. Kelly refused. She rolled the dice in court, and the jury came back with the harshest sentence possible. Death. A rare outcome for a woman, even rarer for a mother. And so she sat on death row while her children grew up on the outside, caught between loyalty, grief, and shame. Over the years, something shifted. Kelly studied theology. She mentored other inmates. She wrote letters, preached about redemption, and even the Pope himself asked for mercy on her behalf. And here's where her children stepped back into the frame. They begged, pleaded with the parole board to spare their mom's life. They knew what she had done, but they still wanted their mother alive. Still wanted her voice in their lives. But the state said no. Every appeal failed. Every delay ended with the same reality. The execution clock was ticking. And then came the final night. Witnesses say Kelly cried, prayed, and yes, sang. But her last words, they were directed outward, toward 2 families forever scarred. To Doug's family, she said, "I am so sorry. That amazing man lost his life because of me." And then, this is the part that will stay with you, she turned to her children through the witnesses. She said, "You let my kids know I went out singing Amazing Grace." Next is Wanda Gene Allen.
As well as I am with my family. Because they know I loved her and her family loved her as well, and my family loved her as well.
December 2nd, 1988. A cold Oklahoma night. A police station parking lot. And in that quiet, almost unremarkable place, Wanda Gene Allen pulled the trigger that would shape the rest of her life, her children's lives, and the debate over justice in America. One bullet, one moment, and suddenly a mother of 2 found herself walking the path to death row. Now let's not forget, Wanda wasn't just a criminal headline or a case file. She was also someone's mom. She had 2 children who watched their mother's name appear in newspapers, who sat through hearings, who visited her behind thick prison glass. Imagine that, growing up knowing the state is preparing to execute your own mother. Wanda was born in 1959 into poverty and hardship. The second of 8 children. Her childhood wasn't just difficult, it was marked by trauma. She was hit by a truck at age 12, stabbed later on, and doctors would eventually find she had serious brain damage. Low IQ scores, trouble with reasoning, and difficulty with cause and effect. And here's the haunting question. How much of Wanda's future was shaped not by willful choice, but by a brain already damaged and struggling? But fast forward, before the night of the killing, Wanda had already spent time behind bars. In 1981, she was convicted of manslaughter in the death of her roommate, Deidre Pettis. She served for about 4 years. Then came the volatile relationship with Gloria Leathers. Arguments, fights, threats. They spilled into public view. And then came that night in December. A fight escalated. Wanda had a gun. She pulled it. Gloria was shot and later died. Prosecutors pointed to Wanda's violent past and argued this wasn't just a crime of passion. This was premeditated murder. The jury agreed. Death sentence. But let's pause for a moment, because here's where Wanda's children come back into the picture. During the long years of appeals, her sons grew up while their mother sat in a death row cell. They visited, they wrote letters. She tried to stay present in their lives the only way she could. from inside those prison walls. And you have to ask, was she a monster to them, or was she just Mom? Her lawyers later argued that the trial wasn't fair, that her brain damage wasn't fully explained, that her intellectual limits weren't presented to the jury. In fact, many experts believe that if her condition had been laid out properly, she might never have received the death penalty at all. But the courts didn't bend. Appeal after appeal was denied. And so Wanda's children carried on, knowing that the clock was ticking down on their mother's life. January 11th, 2001. Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Wanda Gene Allen is led to the execution chamber. Family members, including her children, were present to hear her final words. And here's what she chose to say. She looked out, and with calm in her voice, she quoted the Bible, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Her story was captured in the documentary The Execution of Wanda Gene, and it forces us to think beyond the headlines. She was a killer, yes, but she was also a daughter, a sister, and a mother whose children had to carry that legacy forever. If that was shocking, wait till you hear about Angel Mu Pui Pang. All right, folks, we're stepping into a story that is as tragic as it is chilling. A story of a young mother, a suitcase, and a decision that would end not only her freedom, but her very life. This is the case of Angel Mu Pui Pang. Now, Angel wasn't some hardened drug lord. She wasn't running a cartel. She was, in fact, a mother, a woman born in Macau, holding Portuguese citizenship, and at the time living in Hong Kong. She had a young son, and like so many single mothers struggling to make ends meet, she was vulnerable. Vulnerable to promises of quick cash. Vulnerable to the dangerous networks that prey on desperation. But here's where her story takes that sharp, irreversible turn. On August 29, 1991, at Singapore's Changi Airport, authorities stopped Angel. In her bags, they found packets, not Rolex watches as she claimed, but heroin. 5.6 kilograms of it. Now, in Singapore, that wasn't just an arrest. That was practically a death sentence waiting to be written. The law was merciless. Carry that much and you must hang. No judge, no jury could undo it. And so began the trial. Angel stood before the High Court. She admitted yes, she carried the packages, but she swore she thought they were luxury watches. She said she was promised money, around $50,000, for the job. Think about that, risking your life, your child's future, for a sum that barely covers a few months of bills in Hong Kong. But the prosecution didn't buy her story. In their eyes, she was another trafficker. In April 1993, the verdict came down. Guilty, death by hanging. Now, let's pause here, because this is where the case stops being just about heroin and statutes and starts being about a mother and her child. You see, Angel wasn't just awaiting death, she was waiting while her son grew up without her. When her execution was scheduled, something unusual happened. The authorities actually postponed it. Why? So she could spend Christmas with her little boy. Imagine that, a mother counting her last holiday, not knowing how to smile through it, knowing every laugh with her child was also a goodbye in disguise. Clemency appeals came pouring in. Human rights groups begged Singapore to spare her, pointing to her youth, to her motherhood, to the possibility she was tricked. Letters reached powerful offices. But mercy, it never came. The government held firm. Drugs killed, they said, and traffickers must face the rope. And then, the end. The reports say Angel was calm. Her lawyer described her as ready, almost resigned. Her cremation was small, quiet, attended by her sister and close friends. But the part that still haunts people today is what wasn't recorded. Her last words to her son. We know she was given time with him. We know she spent Christmas by his side. But what did she whisper to him? Did she say, "Be good, my son"? Did she tell him to forgive her? Did she beg him never to walk the same path? We will never know. The records are silent. The only things left are fragments. The postponement for family time, the quiet farewell, the lawyer's remark that she was calm. And between those fragments lies the unspoken, a final private conversation between a condemned mother and her child. That silence is louder than any headline. Next is Velma Barfield.
Today, if it were possible, I wish that I could take every bit of hurt on myself.
November 2nd, 1984. The state of North Carolina prepares for something it hasn't done before: put a woman to death by lethal injection. And not just any woman, a mother, a grandmother, a church-going caregiver who hid a deadly secret. Her name, Velma Barfield. Now let me tell you this, folks, Velma didn't start off looking like a monster. She was born Margie Velma Bullard back in 1932 in a poor, strict household. She married young, had kids, and on the surface she lived that quiet southern life. But under that polite smile, under those Sunday dresses, something darker was brewing. And it wouldn't just tear apart the lives of strangers, it would drag her own children into a courtroom, face to face with the horror of what their mother had done. By the late 1960s, Velma's life had spiraled. She struggled with chronic pain, got hooked on prescription drugs, and fell into this pattern of lies, debts, and desperation.
The last 10 years was just like that. Years of a drug nightmare.
And that's when people close to her started to, well, let's just say, fall ill. Husbands, relatives, neighbors she cared for. Even her own fiancé, Stuart Taylor, in 1978. He was the one whose death finally tipped off investigators. His body revealed the poison, arsenic. And once police started looking back, they realized a chilling pattern. Velma had left a trail of bodies behind her. And here's where it gets painful. Her children, Ronnie and Kim, sat through her trial, listening as doctors described how their mom had slipped poison into food and drinks. Can you imagine that? Hearing in detail how your mother killed people she was supposed to protect. Ronnie would later say he loved his mom, but he couldn't deny what the evidence showed. For the kids, it was like watching the person who raised them transform into someone unrecognizable. In all of this, her son was very supportive and often seen with her. The trial itself was messy. The defense tried to explain her actions through childhood trauma, drug addiction, and even psychiatric disorders. They said Velma sometimes acted in these dissociative states, almost like she wasn't fully aware of what she was doing. But the jury didn't buy it. To them, she was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, poisoning for money, poisoning for control. And when the verdict came down, guilty of first-degree murder, her kids sat there, broken. Their mother, the woman who tucked them in at night, had just been branded a killer. But death row changed Velma. At least that's how she told it. She became deeply religious, leading Bible studies, comforting inmates, and gaining a reputation as a kind of prison minister.
I know that without him and his strength that has sustained me, I couldn't have made it even thus far.
Some high-profile Christian leaders even begged for her life to be spared. And her children. They visited her, prayed with her, clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, the governor would grant clemency. But politics were harsh in the 80s. North Carolina wasn't in the mood to show mercy. And then came the night of her execution. Imagine this, Velma, the so-called killer mom, was given her last meal. Cheese doodles and a Coke. That's it. But what matters most are her final words. To her children and family members, she left a message. She said she was sorry. She asked for forgiveness. She told her kids she loved them and that she would see them again one day. Her last moments weren't defiance, weren't denial. They were a mother's voice, trembling, trying to hold on to some kind of connection with the children she had already hurt so deeply. And then, the injection. Quiet, final. She was 52 years old. Her corneas and skin were donated after death. A strange act of giving after a life of so much taking. Judy Buenoano. All right, let's talk about Judy Buenoano, a woman whose story is as chilling as it is tragic. And it's not just about murder, insurance money, or poison. It's about the twisted role of a mother who involved her own children in her dark web. Judy's crimes go all the way back to the early 1970s. At first glance, she looked like any ordinary wife and mother. Her husband, Air Force Sergeant James Goodyear, had just returned from Vietnam, but soon after, he fell mysteriously ill. Doctors couldn't figure it out. Within weeks, he was dead. At the time, nobody asked too many questions, but years later, when his body was exhumed, traces of arsenic showed up. That discovery would open a door to a chain of horrors nobody expected. And here's where the family angle comes in. Judy didn't just poison boyfriends and husbands, she poisoned her own son. Michael, her young boy, began showing the same strange symptoms: weakness, nausea, his body slowly breaking down. He was eventually diagnosed with severe arsenic poisoning that left him partly paralyzed. And then, in 1980, when Judy took him on what was supposed to be a relaxing canoe trip, the unthinkable happened. The canoe capsized. Michael, weighed down by the braces on his legs, drowned. The investigators later called it no accident. Can you imagine? A mother watching her disabled son drown just to collect the insurance payout. It was obviously no coincidence that all these men ended up dead. That's when people began to realize Judy's so-called bad luck with men, and now with her own child, wasn't luck at all. Prosecutors built their case with three big pieces: toxicology reports, money trails from life insurance, and a repeating pattern of death that followed Judy like a shadow. Husbands, lovers, even her son, all conveniently insured, all mysteriously dead. And sitting right in the middle of it all, Judy. Now, let's jump to the trial. This is where things get even more disturbing. Courtrooms are usually filled with tears, breakdowns, and emotional outbursts. But Judy, she sat there almost stone-faced. Her surviving children, the ones she hadn't harmed, were still part of her life, visiting her in prison, sitting in court, struggling to reconcile the woman they called Mom with the killer prosecutors painted her to be. Imagine being in their shoes, sitting there, listening as lawyers explain how your mother poisoned your brother, your father figure, and tried to kill again. And then the sentencing. Judy was given the death penalty for her son Michael's death. Appeals went on for years, but nothing could undo what she had done. Reporters and prison staff often said she stayed calm on the outside, but there were moments when cracks showed. And as her execution date in 1998 approached, the first woman to face the electric chair in Florida since the 1800s, the spotlight on her family grew brighter. Now people always wonder about final words. Did she confess? Did she apologize? Did she say anything to her kids? Well, reports are mixed. Officially, the prison noted she gave no final statement, but others close to the case say her last words were whispered to her children. A quiet "I love you." No long speech, no tearful confession, just that. Whether those words were sincere or simply routine is something only her children will ever know. And here's the eerie part. Think about the contradiction. A mother who could let her son drown, still telling her kids "I love you" with her last breath. Was it love? Was it manipulation? Or was it her final way of controlling the narrative? That's the question that lingers. This leads us to the case of Suzanne Basso. Her name still lingers in the dark corners of Texas crime history. Now, when people talk about killer moms, her story stands out because it's not just about murder. It's about family, manipulation, and the way she pulled her own children into her web of violence.
The 14th woman since the death penalty was reinstated in the 1970s. Suzanne Basso was convicted of torturing and killing Louis Buddy Musso in 1998.
So let's rewind to the late 1990s. Suzanne was a woman who painted herself as charming, even nurturing, but beneath that surface was something cold and calculated. In 1998, she set her sights on Louis Buddy Musso, a gentle 59-year-old man with developmental disabilities. He thought Suzanne wanted to marry him, to care for him. Instead, she saw him as a target, specifically his life insurance policy. Now here's where it gets chilling. Suzanne didn't act alone. She roped in others to help, including her own son. Imagine that. A mother, instead of protecting her child, guiding him into a brutal conspiracy. Prosecutors later said she was the ringleader, and her family, even her son, became her soldiers. Together, they lured Musso to Texas, where he was beaten, tortured, and left to die. And the horror wasn't quick. It was prolonged, vicious, and planned. When the trial began, the jury didn't just see a cold-blooded woman. They saw a manipulator who had used her family like pawns. Her son, Craig, was painted as one of her key accomplices. Witnesses described Suzanne not as a bystander, but as the mastermind, the one calling the shots. Prosecutors hammered in the idea that this wasn't a random act of violence. It was family-driven, family-enabled. That's what shocked the courtroom. A mother's influence is supposed to save, but here it was destroyed. Through the trial, Suzanne's children were caught in the storm. Her family ties became evidence, proof of her grip and control. It made the case heavier, darker. Because if she could manipulate her own blood, What chance did a vulnerable man like Musso ever have? And that's a question the jury could not ignore. She was convicted of capital murder in 1999. Appeals dragged on for years. Her lawyers argued mental illness, delusions, and claimed she wasn't fit for execution. But the courts didn't bend. The verdict stood, and the date with death grew closer. Now, fast forward to February 5th, 2014, Huntsville, Texas. Suzanne Basso, 59 years old, was strapped to the gurney in the death chamber. Reporters filled the viewing room, and here's the detail that sticks. This so-called killer mom had the chance to speak her last words, to say something to her kids who had stood by, tangled in her crimes, their lives permanently scarred. But Suzanne refused. She stayed silent. Not a single word, not to the witnesses, not to her family, not even to her children. And that silence was louder than any statement she could have made. Was it defiance? Was it guilt eating her alive? Or was it her final way of controlling the story, leaving her children with questions instead of closure?